Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to the Weekend Wellness Hour show. Today, we have a special guest who is actually my professor back in graduate school in physical therapy school, way long time ago. And Dr. Cole,
Oh,
Dr. Dr. Cole Galloway is joining us. He is a professor at the University of Delaware Physical Therapy program, but he has a host of knowledge in rehabilitation, neuroscience, child development, and does a lot of work in how mobility impacts the brain. So thank you so much for joining us today, Cole.
well, thank you. I'm the one that begged, hey, I want to talk. So thanks, Amy. It's good to see you after so many
Yeah,
years.
absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit about your background? Obviously, I know you as a
Yeah.
professor, but can you share with us your kind of a little bit of your academic and professional career journey to get to where you are?
Yeah, well, I started, I won't go all the way back to being born in Mississippi, a small child in Mississippi, but it kind of influenced things because I
Mhm,
now work in justice issues with mobility as a human right. And so it's not a thing being born in the 60s in the Deep South,
mhm.
to a family of half artists, half scientists. And I think people that know me go, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Because I've always liked my science, and I'm a skeptic at heart, with the other side of my brain being a very open um, person that wants relationships and social, and I got all that in my work. Actually went to University of Southern Mississippi, not to brag. Got, I learned one thing I think in all of undergrad, but I went there. I was going to be Jane Goodall. I was going to work with
Oh,
monkeys in the jungle. That's what I
oh,
was going to do.
mhm.
And some knucklehead told me, "Well, you can't do jungle work and have a family." And I also wanted that. I was a weirdo from way back. I want in eighth grade. I can remember wanting. I want a wife and some kids and a picket fence. I want a home and a dog and yeah.
Yeah.
I was super popular, as you can tell. Thank you, band. Thank you, band geeks, for keeping me alive. But I went to Southern Miss and was told that silliness about you can't do field work.
Wow.
Um, and I love movement.
Mhm.
I wasn't a great athlete, but I loved sports and I loved dance. And my dad was a concert pianist, and my brothers and everybody in my family were huge Alabama football fans. So movement and art. I thought everybody in the world had gay poets from New Orleans that came over in the afternoons to their house in high school. So it was this really cool mix of Southern Living magazine and Rolling Stone magazine on the coffee table. But I exited into Southern Miss and then found out, like, oh my gosh, not everybody has this mix. And sort of just along the way, Carol Brown, just a run of the mill, awesome PT. I was volunteering in PT, and he said, you should be a PT. You really are a PT." And I was like, "Oh
Mhm.
wow." And this guy was great. He was handsome and he was sophisticated and he had a job doing stuff with people.
Mhm.
So I was like, "Great. I guess I'm gonna be a PT, whatever that
Mhm.
is." And then I got into the Medical College of Virginia in Richmond, which was way far away from home.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember my grandmother going, you, you know, you've gone up north. This was in Richmond, Virginia. And I was like, Granny, I'm looking at the Confederate capital. And she goes, there's two of them. There was the one in Montgomery and the one. So I had flown the coop.
Mhm.
That's where I first went like, oh, science. Because I had a very science oriented PT program.
Mhm.
Literally, I don't think we saw many humans outside of our professors. It was
Oh.
2 or 3 years we had a full course in histology,
Mhm.
cell biology. As you know, like we don't deal directly with cells. Like what was I doing in cell? That was just that and a lot of range of motion measurements,
Mhm.
and it was a different time.
Yeah.
But I saw all these people that were very serious about physical therapy. I mean, they were very academic. One smoked a pipe for crying out loud, and they wore jackets that had pads, and it was old school. And I'm like,
Mhm.
wow, this must be a science thing. But I had the worst science. Sorry, I think he's passed on, my professor, but
Mhm.
sorry, the worst research course ever. I was like, I hate research, underlying
Oh.
hypotheses, looking at stats. Like,
Mhm.
so what? I don't care. Little did I know, right?
Yeah.
That's where I was headed.
Mhm.
But I did have Anne Van Zant and Roberta Newton were two professors there, and Anne, for some reason, we clicked, and she said, "You need to work at Woodrow Wilson Rehab in Charlottesville, Virginia, outside of Charlottesville." And I did what Anne said. She's a pioneer in PT, just a great person. She was also in pediatrics, so I did a little dabble in kids. And no one told me like, dude, you are a kid. You've never grown up. You should do peds. But they did
Mhm.
say brain injury really needs guys. So I got a job at Woodrow Wilson Rehab and was just in awe. I knew nothing.
Mhm.
Maybe when you were there, did we ever watch videos of me back in the day?
I think we did.
Or had I stopped that because the
No, I
fashion
think so. I
and
think
other
we
things?
did during the PEDS
Woo!
course because I remember that was it was a compressed time, but there were videos
Yeah,
because I think I
yeah.
stayed awake for that part.
Yeah, probably just from the big glasses and the strange chino. It was a different time.
Mhm.
It was,
Yeah.
it was like every year, instead of focusing on the techniques, students would be like, "Damn, that was rough. That's a rough fashion choice." I was like, "Well,
Mhm.
it was cool at the time. You don't know."
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've stopped watching
Mhm.
those videos. But it was the first time I taught someone to roll over.
Mhm.
It was the first time um, I saw people with significant disabilities and became close to them. So the relational
Yeah.
kind of thing started to really work, and I would cry at night. I had never been around disability. I'd never been around from a very scrubbed, um, socially kind of impoverished PT education. I had never literally touched and helped. And in spinal cord care, even today, you're touching people, you're stretching people. That was very foreign. It made me feel very strange. And I would go home and just have this range of emotions. And I'm 20 something at that point. So it was very, very visceral. I've never forgotten it. And many of the clients, I was told things in rehab class that when I was in the clinic, I was remembering like, wow, that I should have listened more in rehab because it was taught um, by a guy that did do the old school social model where you're not supposed to have a distance between you and the client. You're supposed to close that distance. And I think I passed that kind of stuff along to you all. Like
You did.
you have trust equity is very very important in life, especially with these clients that are in pain and are nervous and are scared and they unknown. You're not going to cure anything, but you can certainly build trust. And so you build the trust with these 20 somethings clients that were really you and and I can still remember, I think I passed this on to you guys during class too in traumatic brain injury, that there was a client that helped eat some pizza the day that he was being discharged to a nursing home I think he was 18 or 19. And I don't even talk too much about that because I will go right back to that day. The sun is setting, and he told me, "You're going to be okay. I'm going to be okay, but you're going to be okay. You're going to keep helping people." He was preaching to me. He was settling me down. Um, and so I went off then to PhD into beautiful Tucson. And the only reason I did that, by the way, is that a friend of mine had already gone off the year before and said it was really cool. And I was like, well, it was the dumbest. I'll get a PhD. I'll travel to Tucson too. It must be a cool thing. So I went. That's not a reason to get a PhD. That's not good thinking. But so I went to Tucson,
Mhm.
um, and there I saw basically Nobel laureates walking around in t-shirts, shorts,
Oh.
and flip-flops.
Mhm.
And I went, this is the greatest place I have ever seen. Are you telling me that I can learn about movement and mobility and biomechanics and neuromotor control and get paid a little bit to do it and get up in the morning and play tennis and then ski later on in the year and then Mexican everything. I was totally enamored. The 5 years
Mhm.
flew by. I still feel guilty because when I talk to people about their PhD time, many people cannot stand. It was a very tough time for them.
Yeah.
I was so sad to leave.
Yeah.
I was so sad to leave.
Mhm.
I had really great mentors, and that taught me um, So that rescued me to the value of potentially the value of research. It still was research for research's sake. That
Mhm.
was a different time too. Now we're up to um, yeah, late 90s, and so it's still there's some PT PhDs there, but it's still research for research's sake. Researchers are a big deal. No real talk about impact. You were publishing and presenting. There's no impact
Mhm.
outside of that. That was a worthy thing.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't Galileo where you're studying to just study and you get a stipend or chased down by the church if you really find something new. But
Yeah.
it was kind of that you were held up by the microculture as a scientist. That was a big
Mhm.
deal. And then I had Nicholas, my oldest, my first baby, at the time, and I began as a dissertation daddy. I was spending 3 days at home and the rest of the time in the lab sleeping overnight. Don't do that. That sets up a
Yes.
Vietnam flashback in your postdoc. And after my PhD, the flashbacks were 24, 36-hour stints at research. That was not fun. But I got to know Nicholas really well, and I got to know what babies were doing as I'm thinking about arm control from a
Mhm.
dissertation. I'm seeing him flap to reach and getting
Right.
to know this new little human guy.
Mhm.
And so I thought, and um, I was going to go to a postdoc in Quebec, the 2 to 4 years you do after a PhD. If you want to
Mhm.
do big time research, you get
Right.
federally funded. So a postdoc's a have to. I don't want to move from Tucson, but you need to do a postdoc.
Mhm.
Quebec got hit by the biggest ice storm I think they've ever had still. And my family and I were like, oh, we can't take a new baby to Quebec when it just iced over. So stopping Canadians with winters, I didn't think that was a thing, and
Yeah.
it was a state of emergency. So someone said, maybe you should do baby work instead of just studying reaching. Maybe you should study the emergence of reaching.
Mhm.
And Esther Thalen is the person to go to. She is the George Washington of baby development, and she's still living, and she still works in Indiana. And so in my sophisticated way, I basically called her up in France and said, "You don't know me.
Mhm.
I read your work in PT school, which I had. Anne Van Zant gave us some of Esther's work on chaos theory and dynamic systems and the John
Mhm.
Schultz stuff, all the John
Yeah.
Schultz stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and so I called her up and went, I need to do a postdoc with you. And she was like,
Mhm.
who are you? Send me your CV and let's do this
Mhm.
the right way and come do an interview. And I did an interview, and for some reason, I got in. And that lab, from the second I landed, brought it all together. So it was chaos and dynamic systems theory and broad thinking, multiple factors coming together, behavior emerging.
Mhm.
Um, there's no expert. There's no one factor. So you can see the buildings of this strong base reality for me.
Mhm.
I would have stayed there forever,
Yeah.
but the Delaware job came up, and everyone, even now, but even more then, if you're going to do research, you're going to go to University of Delaware probably,
Mhm.
because I could do 80% research.
Yeah.
That's not a thing. That's still not very much a thing. And Stuart Benner McLeod was the chair, brand new chair, very excited about bringing in new staff. They needed a peds person. By the way, you've never heard me say I treated any peds. I never treated kids.
You
The
did. Yeah.
whole time I've never
You did.
treated kids. It's all been adults with brain injury, but I've never done any other work outside my PhD on anything but kids. So that really helped me see the pediatric medical model, I think,
Mhm.
from an outsider's perspective, and for some reason, I felt the drive. I think from the baby work with Esther, you took babies very seriously. They were our top citizens. They were the most important humans in any country at any one time, were your babies and toddlers,
Mhm.
and so I would start to speak to that. And so the first 10 years at Delaware, um, very traditional research. I was studying flapping to reaching and stuff, and I Sunil Agrawal, who was an engineer at UD, after one seminar, and I've always hated seminars. For any academics listening, if there's anybody smart enough to listen to your stuff from academics and trying to escape, they know that like just seminars are just one out of 20.
Mhm.
The rest of them, you're learning how not to give a talk, how to put your audience to sleep, how to drone on about statistics. You know, that back to that bad stats course, that bad
Mhm.
research course.
Yeah.
But he said, I've got small robots and you got small babies who want to do something together. And I said, not a chance. I'm not a fan of robots or exoskeletons or big high tech. It never helped me as a PT with my adult clients. It takes time away, resources away. No. Well, come at least see. And what he had was a little joystick driven robot that we could put a seat behind.
Mhm.
This was colliding with me wondering what the next steps besides reaching I was going to do in research. So I said, sure, I think if we put kids into these that can't move around, I think we can elevate their cognitive language and socialization scores. And that came from the dynamic systems, which said that mobility and movement is a core driver of development in kids, which for anybody outside of academics, any mom that's dealing with right now a toddler, they go like,
That-
yes. But for academics,
mhm.
it's not argued anymore, but it was argued for a long time about whether movement had any connection to language.
Mhm.
This mobility drive to drive the kids' exploration. And it's like your brain doesn't move.
Yeah.
You took your brain out, put it on a table, it would stay there. And
Mhm.
it doesn't get built by immobility, it gets built by mobility. So your brain and your body work together to take your brain on a vacation.
Yeah.
And we mentioned enriched environment off
Mhm.
air. Enriched environment principle is arguably the most stable, um, unrefuted. It's basically a law now since the 40s when Donald Hebb took wild rats and brought them into his lab. I don't know why he did that, how
Yeah.
the rats snuck in or something, but the wild rats crushed the lab rats in cognitive tests.
Mhm.
And these aren't sit down, they don't fill out multiple guesses. You put them in water and they try to find their way to a maze, or they get
Mhm.
out of a regular maze, or they figure out some movement related thing. And the wild rats were just boom boom.
Yeah.
And so even then he went, there's something they're doing, of course, out in the wild. Their experiences are so different. They must have bigger capacity. Well, now we know, Skip, now what, 80 years later,
Mhm.
my friends in the neuroscience, in the rat neuroscience world, it's a little bit hyperbole, but it's in the ballpark. They can't stop finding new findings with enriched environment. So if you put rats in an enriched environment, which is a physical space that's dynamic and a just right challenge, um, and a social space that's also got some sex, drugs, and rock and roll in terms of for rats. Which to do that
Mhm.
for rats, just put them with family and other members that are not family,
Mhm.
and put a range of acrobatic, gross motor, and fine motor toys, and then have 4 or 5 sets of those and rotate them every few days.
Got it. Okay.
That's what you need. And what you get out of that, if I listed the biochemical cellular systems, neurogenesis, new cells area, it looks illegal. You'd say,
Mhm.
well, adult athletes could never do whatever this is. Athletes can't do that. That's doping. Um, and so this whole idea of plasticity and enriched environment um, started my thinking on the robots, but would really not come to really pressure me to do something different until a little bit later. So we published on some robot work with babies,
Mhm.
the babies that were before they were moving when they would drive for 20 minutes. These little silly cars. They walked earlier, for example. Well, how
So,
do? Yeah, good.
real quick, can you describe these little cars and how the babies
Yeah,
fit in with it? Because I think that's kind of important to
yeah.
get people's in their head.
Yeah, the first iteration were not we're going to head toward Toys R Us and
Mhm.
highly accessible, cheap. These are teaching robots that have it's like a coffee table on wheels.
Mhm.
If it was a small circular coffee table with sensors, and it's a way for engineers to play around with circuitry and sensors and motors. And so it's kind of a elevated STEM platform for undergrads. We harnessed that and put a little chair behind it with some the types of casters that I have on my office chair. Under that
Mhm.
chair, hooked it up with a joystick, and this little red circular drum-looking thing would drive around. And it's really that dumb. We didn't use any sensors. We didn't use any of the capabilities. We just wanted kids to drive around. At the early learning center, we would take them into the gymnasium. These are
Mhm.
little 4 to 6 month olds. They're not crawling yet.
Okay.
So they've been carried around, which is passive. That's going to become
Mhm.
important. Everybody's carried around the first months of life. It's only
Right.
after you start crawling out of sitting, or if you're with me, you have a harness or a car or something,
Yeah.
that you get the active. We're doing some work right now where we're looking at brain technology to try to just take a propaganda snapshot of your brain passively being
Mhm.
driven around and
Okay.
your brain actively driving the same circuit, but you're controlling it. And it's going to be lights on, lights off.
Really neat.
And that will have a tie toward some technology that's out in the world right now for peds kids, medical strollers
Mhm.
that need to be seen as constraints,
Okay.
not as wheeled awesome devices, but as limiters in a way that adults really haven't conceived of them. So there's a
Okay.
through line there. But at this point, we're just working with these 15,000 a pop toys,
Mhm.
so to speak, STEM toys. Um, so cognitively, language-wise, and so they talked earlier, they thought a little bit deeper as
Okay.
kids, and they walked earlier.
Okay.
Well, they didn't practice walking. We didn't change the language environment. These were 20 minutes
Mhm.
a day, 3 times a week.
Okay.
So it wasn't huge dosage. So why did they walk and talk earlier when they didn't receive the intervention wasn't walking or talking?
Mhm.
What we think happened, and this is where we sort of added some jargon to literature, is exploratory drive. So picture yourself sitting there. You really have optic flow, and sort of the video game has been passive. You've been passively taken through it, but you've never driven the horse through the countryside or the
Right.
Lamborghini through LA in Grand Theft
Mhm.
Auto or anything. You're just being driven,
Right.
and now you get a chance. So when you pull the joystick, you
Mhm.
control the optic flow, proprioception, vestibular, visual, and with almost out exception. Now, 10,000 cars from Go Baby Go,
Mhm.
I still have not seen a kid that doesn't lose their minds when that happens. There's something so magical that I can't even imagine it because I move myself around. But when
Mhm.
kids start moving themselves around, they get very foveated and focused.
Mhm.
Some of them laugh hysterically.
Yeah.
You can just tell they'll go forward, 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 forward,
Mhm.
forward. They're testing, right? They're testing. Wait,
Yeah.
am I controlling this? I
Yeah.
am. Oh, what? Huh.
Wow.
So it's very powerful. Now back to all the kids we work with and care the most
Mhm.
about, the peds clients. So
Mhm.
they're not experiencing day after day that, they're experiencing passive. So, but at this point, I don't even care about that. I'm just like, cool, we got results. Let's go talk about these results.
Mhm.
Families come up afterwards and go, this is really great.
Yeah.
When are you doing this for our kids? When are you commercializing?
Yep.
Well, and I did that classic kind of research academic thing. Well, you don't understand. I'm a researcher, kind of a big deal.
Mhm.
I'll go 50%, and then the clinician will take it and go 50%.
Mhm.
Industry will go 50%. I just am the basic scientist kind of thing.
Mhm.
Talk families, talk families, talk families.
Mhm.
Erosion, weird feelings inside, like ugh.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm a fraud a little bit. It feels like I'm promising. No, these families are just under stress and they're taking this of course I would too, but they're just over the top. I talked to my mentors in science.
Mhm.
What did they tell me? No, you have an obligation to follow this through, or no, you have an obligation to return to the lab. Return to the lab.
Yep. Yep. Wow.
Luckily, I tried to follow that advice. I tried to, but I would get voicemail from crying moms. And I would go out every time I would go out and talk about this. And then CNN came, Discovery Channel came. I became to be a golden boy for Delaware, and I was pulled out Dog and Pony Show to show off this thing: babies
Mhm.
driving robots.
Yeah.
Boom, babies driving robots. Discovery Channel, like I said, CNN, CBS,
Absolutely.
NPR. Well, that's great, but it gets your word out to these other people called community people that they're actually
Mhm.
There are people that live outside the lab. I don't know if you've heard about
Yes.
them.
Yes.
It's the 7 billion monkeys that live in the jungle.
Uh-huh.
They react to this by going, I need you, I need you, I need you.
Yeah, we want more.
Ugh. David Glansman, a
Mhm.
senior, I believe, no, he's a junior summer student of mine, was like, why don't we? I'm just bemoaning. I
Mhm.
can't believe it. Looking back, it's very embarrassing to, because people think, oh, you were a genius, go baby go is so blah blah blah, and I'm like, no, it was not me. And they go, oh, you're deferential. No, I'm an idiot because I'm sitting there going, why? The community members had brought me my future, my purpose. It would buffer me against bad things. They're
Mhm.
saying I need you, and I
Right.
was so elite and disconnected, and I went into an organization that had sort of inequity in its infrastructure that I couldn't even see. Like, you're bringing me the biggest gift, right? And I was like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, that's not changed in the academic model.
Yeah.
It's not changed in the medical model.
Mm.
The disability community doesn't drive, you know, the disability, services. They
Mhm.
don't. They're not in positions of power. You
No.
don't go to get your cancer treated by a physician that had to have cancer or had to have
Mhm.
caregiving for someone with cancer. That's not a thing yet. It's changing, but
Yeah.
it's not there. So I was being told this, and I was like bemoaning to David, like, oh, I wish I could get these people off my back. And
Mhm.
he said, well, why don't we? What do you think they need? And I think I just need an accessible thing. I need something. I can't start a business. I'm not business savvy. I'm
Right.
I'm just now gotten promotion in tenure, so I'm now starting to rock and roll on my own grants. I don't have time.
Mhm.
I convinced myself it wasn't a priority. The
Yeah.
university and my department did not consider it to be a priority. It wasn't
Mhm.
like, okay, great. The second the community comes to you, you're given a hall pass and you must exit because that's what universities are for. You're
Yeah.
not allowed to do anything else. You must follow that narrative.
Right.
No, it was like, don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't be distracted. So we went to Toys R Us. We saw the future and went to a pool noodle store in Joanne Fabric right there in
Mhm.
Newark, Delaware. And I'm still not getting it. Literally I'm seeing the future, and I'm like,
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm also with this with everybody I've ever dated, good friends. I'm just oblivious to I'm the guy that gets eaten by the bear, and I'm taking pictures to the end.
Yes.
Um, so there's my life, my whole mission going forward. I'm like, yeah, David, whatever you want to do, this is fine. He built one very similar to what we build today.
Really.
Um, I think he works at Intel now, which
Mhm.
is so fun. His dad was a PT.
Okay.
So he's showing me like this is what you need to be doing, and I'm like, great. Maybe in social media is coming on. It's
Mhm.
2010. This thing called Facebook. Why don't we just put the instructions out? That's what we'll do. Let's just put the instructions out. A couple
Mhm.
of people will see it, and then we're done. Right? Right.
Yes.
Well, you put it out there, and now I get a call from New Zealand. How do you start a chapter of Go Baby Go? Because I'd called it Go Baby Go.
Okay.
Just off the cuff, Go Baby Go, it'll never stick. Well, that
Mhm.
was the greatest branding,
Yes.
ever. It's got just tons of run on it.
Mhm.
And New Zealand called me and said, we'd like to start a chapter. How do you do that? And I'm like, you're a chapter. Yes, you're a chapter. you're a,
Yeah. I
you're,
designate you.
you're right. They said, and the person calling, Julie Sinclair, had background in Make a Wish. She was on the New Zealand Make a Wish
Oh.
board. She was like, what are the policies and procedures? I'm sure she got off going, this guy's a loser. But I was like, I'll get those to you. We're doing. And then she said, of course, we would fund a site visit to New Zealand. And I was like, well, of course. I mean, that's
Of course. Yeah.
that's of course you will.
Expected.
Yes, I mean, we're not. We're going to do our due diligence here. We're not
Yeah.
monsters. So I had to go to New Zealand a couple of times.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah. Um, so people started doing chapters.
Okay.
The university comes and says, you can't build cars for kids. It's too risky. We'll allow you to build cars under research, but you can't build cars just for kids. The legal stuff is too much.
Mhm.
It's too real.
Yeah.
Um, Fisher Price contacted us about the same time, and I thought, oh, here we go. Ooh, I'm in hot water. And they were like, "Don't you ever stop. We'll partner with you. This is awesome. Hack our stuff all the time." So
Yeah.
it was another sort of data point on like, wow, academics is
Mhm.
corporates now leading. Corporates now like, cool,
Yeah.
let's go have some fun and make kids have play.
Yeah.
Um, so that was the chapter. People were wanting to do chapters, and
Mhm.
I got some federal funding from NIH to study the impact of cars. And
Okay.
I got some postdocs come through, and they left to go to Oregon State and back to Taiwan and other places, and they started doing their own research. Fast forward now, we have about a 50 or 60 paper bibliography. About half of them have me on it, but half of them are other people.
Mhm.
So it's science wise this kind of ride on car adaptive stuff. Um, and so it was. I knew enough. Well, number one, I'm not a workaholic, and people
Mhm.
just giggle. I don't feel like a workaholic, although I do think of mobility and kids all day long.
Yeah.
I don't have a gene that allows me to sit down and write out policies and procedures, start a nonprofit, do things like a
Mhm.
normal person of my age would do.
Yeah.
Um, so by that, I have to leave it to the individuals in the communities to do that. Coupled with, I didn't want to have centralized hub. I couldn't envision moving fast enough. And I was starting to get this idea by hanging out with kids and families that mobility was a big deal. Like I
Mhm.
started to listen to the community and started to think about, well, what mobility is driving. I knew but cognitively from my work, mobility drives development. Well, what would you call mobility? And eventually it was like, well, mobility, this seems like a human right. I don't know what that means, but it seems like a human right. Well, now,
Mhm.
United Nations, World Health Organization, play and developmental factors are human rights. So that's where human right, mobility as a human right came. And just recently we've added to that mobility is a human right.
Mhm.
Therefore, we need to act like that.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So if mobility is like water and safety and education and
Right.
work-free environments, we have to have that sense of urgency. And that really
Mhm.
helps people that aren't in the disability community sort of put a North Star that
Mhm.
this is what, we just, yes, we might need to do a 5-year grant, but you don't want to study something more than you provide it when it's a human right. You don't want to come to
Yeah.
your village that doesn't have water and study the best way to provide water. How about if I just
Mhm.
provide you with water and
Yeah.
then study that as I can?
Yeah.
And more and more you start to see in the traditional medical model and traditional research, um, us able-bodied folks tend to study things
Mhm.
and then provide them at a point that is safe enough, studied enough, right?
Mhm.
And then when you get your own disability or get your own factor,
Yep.
have your kid that has an issue, that's the first time you might actually, as a researcher, go, wait a minute, I did have this backwards. And now I have collaborators that are also caregivers for kids with mobility challenges.
Mhm.
And they're the ones that are like, wow, they are really mad at themselves for their past research careers because now they're a dad of a kid with brain injury, and
Mhm.
now that exposes the infrastructure
Mhm.
of inequity and exposes that research and clinical practice aren't always for the client.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there's lots of well, we have to do this and we have to do this. Well, don't forget that at the end of the day, there's a person there, and the time is
Yeah.
ticking. So while you figure out the best drug, the best surgery, the best this, that, and the other, is there
Mhm.
something you can do right now? And so Go Baby Go was something you could do for $200 for a ride-on car off the shelf and a hundred
Wow.
bucks of supplies. Anybody, a third grade class in Texas. Um,
Mhm.
um, and my buddy in Orlando has adults with Down syndrome building little cars for babies with Down syndrome, and
Oh.
and they, those folks with the adults with Down syndrome have the lived experience. They're in a position
Yeah.
of power with this thing. That's where
Mhm.
we're not there yet as an organization, but that's where we have to
Yeah.
sort of make it that way. With
Yeah.
yeah, so today
Mhm.
I still do research, and I still do everything I did before, but I'm never on campus.
Yeah.
And that, I didn't expect that to be destabilizing, but that is a very weird thing
Mhm.
for for the establishment, for the administration, as to where is it's like a medical provider, a nurse, a therapist, a doctor, wanting to be community based,
Mhm.
and insurance or other administrative guidelines don't allow you to leave the building.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And for community mobility, there's just nothing in those buildings for me.
Right.
There's yeah.
Yeah. And so it's amazing. So right now, so it sounds like you have a little, there are some pockets where cars are being built. Did Fisher Price ever go forward with it and start building these little cars that babies can start to use?
Yeah, they did and they didn't.
Mhm.
They do continue to build cars,
Okay.
and they do have a thought toward universal design, adding aspects of the cars that don't make them adaptive or special needs cars, which is great. So no stigma, no high price. As soon as you have an adaptive, this, that, and the other, like the big red switches we put in the cars are
Mhm.
$60. That's $1 switch. Why is it 60? Well, it's a medical switch. Well, why
Okay.
is it a medical switch? Because it's in a medical catalog.
Okay.
So how about we not do the medical catalog and you
Yeah.
just, third grader, you just build $1 switch? How about
Yeah.
we do that? So the toy industry is a big deal. The toy industry, I say yes, they are into Go Baby Go modifications and how they can seamlessly put them in.
Mhm.
Um, but in a weird way, no, they don't have to. If they'll make devices that are mobile, and now we have cars, but we also have this weird category of just circular plastic donuts that kids sit in, and there's joysticks. They're little spinner cars. They're super fun. They're 150 bucks.
Mhm.
Um, they're typically not Fisher Price, which is high quality. They come from all over the world, which means they may be quality, they may not.
Yeah.
But they're very cheap. They can go indoor, outdoor. Um, so as the toy industry moves to younger and younger, trying to capture the 6 month old, they've got to
Right.
stabilize a sitter. Well, if you stabilize a sitter, if you
Mhm.
give me a little couple of inches on either side in your next iteration, I can have a
Mhm.
3 year old go all the way up to a 3 year old.
Yep.
So there's ways to work with corporations that don't increase their overhead. Because sometimes it's like, well, if you'll do this or this, and they go, yeah, we can, tooling wise, we can do that. If you ask them to do a new car, that might be a $1 to $5 million investment in tooling. But if
Right.
I can go into Fisher Price and go take the wheels of that and the chassis of that, and that they have the tools already, so it's just
Right.
sort of Frankensteining a new car.
Mhm.
They don't have any problem with that, and that's what we're doing right now with them,
Okay.
is taking pieces and parts and making this indoor outdoor zero turn radius proportional drive $250 birth to probably five adaptable unit. Um, that will send a shockwave through the power wheelchair industry, which I affectionately call and other people do too, a cartel,
Yeah.
because they are private equity controlled, which is please,
Mhm.
viewers, please just do a slight rabbit hole down private equity and medical care and
Mhm.
see why that's really a bad idea.
Yeah.
Um, they they stifle innovation. They have a closed
Mhm.
system where the client really is the insurance company, either Medicare, Medicaid, or
Mhm.
Kaiser Permanente or something. Those contracts between the power wheelchair provider and the durable medical equipment middleman in the middle have locked down that system. And what we've seen is that new innovation that comes up against it gets bounced back and not allowed to play, or gets sort of the technology gets, let's just be kind and say, morphed and lost somehow. But in the toy industry, works in a very different way. Um, so I've gotten to use some design training and corporate liaisons to figure out a way around not only the medical model but the medical industry, and the payment. And I would really like to send a $500 um, universally designed kid toy for all kids through FDA. You don't have to do FDA, but sitting it through
Mhm.
FDA would be a strong cannon shot across the bow of the industry. It would scare them a lot because if insurance might well go, we're going to pay for 500, but we're not paying for 15,000,
Mhm.
and they don't control the toy industry, and they certainly don't control me.
Mhm.
Um, so that's been the other fun thing is to do the traditional research, get it into social justice, community based organizing for mobility and
Mhm.
technology, and then to pan back out and see the shock of I can do everything right, but I'm not going to inject any of my new innovative thoughts into that industry. You have to work outside of that.
Mhm.
And I think more and more people in their various fields are realizing like you can bang your head up against the medical model, have all the skills in the world, but maybe you just need to just sidestep that. Just look at an adjacent career or adjacent noun, adjacent um, category, and go, oh, I can run further, faster, and more impact and more helpful, and
Right.
a deeper connection with
Mhm.
the client.
Yeah.
So that's where I am right now. Is yeah, I work with individual clients now, not as a
Mhm.
PT, as
Mhm.
sort of a mobility play expert,
Yeah. Yeah.
and trying to get toward um, toddlers worldwide spend about 80% of their waking hours that they're allowed to moving. That's a very high bar for all the sweeties that we work with that don't have the mobility they want.
Mhm.
But I'm picking some case studies um, for various reasons to try to get these individual kids up to 4 hours. We get about an hour or two on average a day with cars and with the harnesses. The harnesses are simply those bodyweight support harnesses that we use over
Mhm.
treadmills put into real world situations.
Okay.
So, so we're getting to the hour to 2 hours, which is way above a home program, and it's
Yeah.
usually socially embedded. But to get to 4 hours is actually going to have to make us really understand because it can't. So the families I work with, whether they're privileged or not, they're oppressed and marginalized or not, they don't have any more time to give. So it's a really interesting box to work in. I've got to get the child to help co-create more and more
Right.
because the parents, adults, I think worldwide probably adults won't play with their kids more than about 15 or 30 minutes a day.
Mhm.
And you don't want your child playing only with parents. You want them
Yeah.
to be learning from peers.
Mhm.
Um, so we set the bar
Yeah.
pretty high at 4 hours. I think we'll crack it. I think I'll have to collaborate with NASA. I'm looking forward to doing that because NASA actually is a weird partner that I think we should have, but they are very adept at number one, big goals, human
Mhm.
centered goals, and they people think of NASA as high tech. They can't send high tech to Mars. They have to send like everyday tech. Like, yeah, the Hubble Space Telescope
Yeah.
is a giant lens and is a big camera. It's not that sophisticated. The
Mhm.
sophistication is sending it back from the edge of the living room, way
Right.
back. So, so I think we'll continue to broaden our collaborators um, out deeply in the community, but also left and right to people. We've worked with Google and Microsoft in the past who are interested in the tech side and monitoring where you are and what you're doing in terms of driving these cars.
Yeah.
So,
Gosh, that's amazing.
yeah.
Oh, I really appreciate you sharing all this. How can people learn more about it and kind of keep up with
Um,
where you're at and
Probably
reach
the
out to you?
easiest way is just to Google Go Baby Go.
Hmm.
If they want to personally be involved,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And I'm glad you said that because if people come away going, "Oh, this is really cool," I've
Yeah.
kind of failed. If they go like, "That sounds something that my teenager would do," I wonder if they have a STEM curriculum. Yeah, we do. But I
Yeah.
wonder if it's like middle school. Yeah, it is. Um, I wonder if we're working with Toyota pretty heavily now. Um, so if people think, well, this is really cool, I really failed. If they think this is something that I'd like to do, or I'm a teacher and I'd like to
Yeah.
have this as a STEM project, that's not just me saying, yes, I think that's a good idea. We can turn you on to half a dozen school districts that do
Okay.
this.
Okay.
So anybody that has any interest in a child that needs a car
Hmm.
or a builder, anybody dumb enough to build with us kind of gets changed.
Okay.
So that's whether you're an undergraduate or third grader
Mhm.
or ladies club or Lions Club,
Yeah.
Civitan, that kind of stuff. So they can look me up certainly
Okay.
at Go Baby Go and Cole Galloway if they want to help. And if you want to send donations to the University of Delaware, that's great. A better use of your money is finding
Mhm.
out who your most local Go Baby Go chapter is. There are
Okay.
probably 300 chapters worldwide, but I don't know all the chapters because chapters start chapters that start chapters.
Yeah.
And as we said before, I'm not a centralized hub of
Mhm.
that. So if you live in Waco, Texas, you've got a chapter there. If you live in El Paso, you got two chapters there. And I know lots of chapters, but just Google
Mhm.
your own state, community,
Okay.
region. But certainly get a hold of me if you need something. Um, yeah,
Wonderful.
that's
Well, thank you. I really appreciate
in
this,
a
and thank you for
nutshell.
your time.
You bet. You bet.
Wonderful. And thank you all for joining us today. Please reach out to Dr. Galloway. I'll put his information in the notes so you have access to that. But thank you so much again, and have a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you next week. Bye now.